This is Once Upon a Non-Time, December 14th. John, the locust-eating, camel-coated preacher. Do you know anyone named John? Does John eat weird things? Does John eat locusts? Remember the cute little baby that old Elizabeth had? That cute little baby grew up to be a toddler, and then a little boy, and then a big boy named John. He'd be out with his parents, and strangers would say, "Hello, you look like you're having fun today. Are you visiting your grandma and grandpa?" John would laugh and say, "Actually, they're my parents." He then used his miraculous birth as an opportunity to tell people about God. "Before I was born, my mom and dad were old and barren. And guess what? An angel visited my dad when he was working inside the temple, and everyone thought he was dead." And usually John's dad, Zacharias, would cut him off and say, "All right, let's go, son. I'm sure they don't want to hear all the details." Sometimes people would say, "Oh, no, that's all right. Go ahead with the story. I'm intrigued. You were visited by an angel? A real angel?" Or if people were in a hurry, they might think, "Oh, religion, that's for them, but not for me." But maybe they'd still be polite and say, "Thank you, but I have to go now." John told his story everywhere he went. He lived in the desert and grew up to be a strange-looking person, but he was a man of courage. John wore camel hair clothes and ate grasshoppers. But he was a godly preacher. He loved Jehovah. He worshiped God and wanted to please him. Even though he looked strange on the outside, people could tell he was really passionate about what he said. He preached that the Messiah was coming soon and that people would turn their hearts to him. Most people thought he was crazy, but over time, John gathered a group of loyal followers who also loved God and wanted to know God more. John's whole job in life, determined even before he was born, was to prepare the world for Jesus' arrival. He was to preach righteousness or rightness and repentance, turning from sin. When he preached, people thought, "Wow, this guy is pretty intense." But he's not like the Pharisees. He really loves his God. He really believes in holiness. Is this guy the Messiah? Is John the promised deliverer? As you read before on day 9, John was great in God's eyes and like Jesus in many ways, but John was always careful to point people to the actual Messiah, Jesus. John was so humble that he'd say, "You know those poor servants that have to do the stinky foot duties? I'm even lower than that compared to Jesus." The stinky foot servant's job was to loosen people's stinky shoes after they had worked with stinky animals, walked through stinky streets, and sweat in stinky sandals. It was so stinky, Jewish people would have their Gentile servants do that job. John was a mighty man, but he used his life to point to his distant cousin. Do you have cousins? Do you have super special cousins with a miracle birth? John does, but John's cousin was almost born on the side of the road. We'll read more about that tomorrow. This was a fun theological deep dive into the parallels between Jesus and John the Baptist. And it's interesting how much of Luke chapter 1 is devoted to John the Baptist. He's not even the main character. Jesus is. But that is an incredibly long chapter, and so much of it is describing in even some of the same words, some of the same thoughts, especially that word great comes up a couple different times about John the Baptist and Jesus Christ. And it's interesting to see those parallels, but every single time you see that no matter what the parallel is, Jesus is always shown as the greater one. He's always shown as the higher one, as the most important one. And that's the right kind of distinction right there. And he's the source of our salvation. And as great as John was, it's all about Jesus Christ. And I love that even in the themes of the stories. And so that's very good. Over the next couple of days, we're talking about, again, some speculation about the travel and some ideas of how it might have gone down as Jesus, as Joseph and Mary traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And so we'll see you in the next video when we talk about the travels.